Britain's top commentators speak out on controversial issues without the fear of the cancel culture sweeping the rest of the media. And if there's one damning example of how political correctness is a stain on this nation's soul, it's the outrageous and tragic grooming gang scandals that have ravaged northern communities. The most recent and unfathomable revelations came from the Telford child sex inquiry report last week, which concluded more than 1,000 young girls were targeted in campaigns of rape and sexual abuse at the hands of mostly British Pakistani men, spanning decades. It's a familiar story seen across the country. Rotherham, Rochdale, Aylesbury, Oxford, Derby, Halifax, the list goes on. But sadly, it wasn't just the vile and sustained abuse of young working-class white girls ignored by the authorities meant to protect them that has caused so much outrage and hurt. Writing in a column drawing attention to the, quote, moral depravity of treating cases like this with kid gloves, Spiked Online editor Tom Slater states there has been a conspiracy of silence when it comes to Pakistani Muslim grooming gangs. This tragedy has played out time and time again. Cowardly authorities prizing political correctness over protecting the most vulnerable have ignored the evil on their doorstep for fear of being accused of racism or fueling tension. While the Tory leadership contest and the heatwave means the story has been often overlooked by the MSM, I'm ensuring it won't be here, and I'm delighted to say that Tom Slater joins me now. Tom, has this scandal proved that political correctness is the biggest barrier to justice for grooming gang victims?
It definitely has. I mean, we've seen this story play out time and time again. First, you have the kind of industrial scale barbarism of these grooming gangs. As you were saying, 1,000 girls believed to have been abused, raped, gang raped, trafficked in this one West Midlands town since the 1980s up until today. But then, as we saw in Rotherham, as we saw in towns across England and across Britain, there was also these condemnations of the authorities and the police and local council for effectively turning a blind eye to the rape of children for fear of being called racist. There's various points in this report that points that out. As way back as the 1990s, teachers concerned about raising this issue when they saw examples of it. Even higher ups in the council in the mid-2000s saying that they were concerned that they could spark a race riot if this was properly investigated. And what we essentially see here is, again, trying to avoid slings and arrows, avoid accusations of racism, and as a result of that, abandoning the most vulnerable people in society imaginable to the most unimaginable abuse. So I think it's definitely confirmed that political correctness is really at the heart of this horror and how it was allowed to go on for so long.
Absolutely, and this is why we need to stamp out the woke agenda. I think this is why when we see in the Tory leadership contest people try to dismiss woke as being something unsubstantial. It's not. It's at the heart of why a scandal like this was covered up for so long.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, this is essentially a kind of something that kick-started off before we had the word woke. You know, political correctness is the phrase that come on, but it's essentially in the same lineage. It's the idea that you have to silence certain uncomfortable truths because that's better, because in some way that's kind of morally superior than dealing with what might be a very grim situation. And again, I think it survives off of a really low view of everyone involved. This idea that you cannot, for instance, tackle a particular issue in a particular community that many Muslim community leaders have actually raised and talked about, that you will instantly turn those people away from the authorities, that you will spark some kind of race riot. And on the flip side, there's this concern that if you talk about this issue openly, you're going to fuel the far right. For a very long time, the far right were the only people talking about this. And it was the flip side that turned out to be true. The more there was silence on this particular issue, the more only the extremists were going to talk about it. And so I think any kind of claim that political correctness is the worthy response to difficult issues in society has been exploded by this case and many others.
The media haven't liked covering it, though, Tom. I mean, they've done the bare minimum, haven't they, especially the broadcast MSM?
Well, that's what's so strange about it, because we have heard about these stories. They have been reported. You know, national newspapers have sparked some of these investigations. I mean, the Telford report actually began in 2018 because the Sunday Mirror, they're the ones who first...
Huge credit to the Sunday Mirror for this story.
Definitely.
Because it was derided at the time.
By the authorities. But what's strange is that it never really properly kind of impacts on the narrative, does it? We never have a proper conversation about it. Heads never roll in the same way that they do with often much more minor scandals that we might find ourselves talking about. And that's the disparity we can't get over. We know about these cases now, even though it took a long time for them to come to the surface, and yet nothing ever happens because we're still somehow too delicate, almost, it feels like, to talk about these difficult subjects.